Well, I think the lesson, obviously, of the autumn of 2022 with Liz Truss's mini-budget is that whatever you come forward with has to be properly costed and funded, otherwise you lose the confidence of the market. And so I think our expectation is you'll see a bit of fiscal easing towards the end of this year, when most people expect there to be a general election. But after that, I think whoever is in office, and there will be a general election this year, will be fairly constrained. And I think, look at the UK. We're projecting, our economists at JPMorgan are projecting flat GDP growth this year. That's compared to, say, Germany. We're predicting 0.1% there, 0.6% in France. So overall, the picture across Western Europe is one of, more or less stagnation, continuing falling living standards. But the UK in that context has got a lot of strengths. It's got a well-respected regulatory and financial system. It's leading in many sectors. Financial services, obviously one of them, but life sciences, creative industries, aerospace and so forth. Relative to others in Europe, one of the deepest and biggest pools of capital. And people like the legal system, but huge challenges, weak productivity, low levels of business investment, relative to US and Asia, smaller markets, lack of liquidity, some might say. So big challenges. So whoever comes in to deal with this has got some big issues on their hand. One thing that they probably can resolve a bit more quickly is that one of the impediments to investment in the UK is clearly being political instability, frankly, since Brexit. So if you have a period of calm, you have a Prime Minister serving for a number of years instead of 1 or 2 years, that will obviously change the landscape. But big challenges, like I'm head of green economy investment banking at JPMorgan. How do you get to net zero by 2050 as a country? Big issue. So lots of big challenges.
Because, of course, Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer have walked back on that £28 billion green pledge as well. Just one quick question for our viewers who are looking at Jeremy Hunt and Rachel Reeves, the man and woman potentially who's going to be in charge of the money. I know them both, not as well as you do, but I know them both, and I've known Rachel and Jeremy for a long time, and I think they're both pretty sensible politicians. They're not really kind of out on the fringes of either party. Is there a lot, but for our viewers, is there a lot between them in terms of what they can and want to do if whoever's the next Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, look, there are definitely differences in terms of what their parties want to do.
Yes, but what about them, though, as the steward of the finances?
Well, as individuals, they're both married to certain fiscal rules, and they both look back in the mirror at what happened in autumn of 2022 and know if you're not disciplined, you don't have properly costed and funded commitments, then the market will be unforgiving. So I think in that sense there's a unity of understanding of markets. But in some respects, I mean, we have, 77 elections globally this year. Around 43, I think, would be considered to be fair, free and democratic. This is probably one of the more predictable elections relative to the others. And actually, interestingly, I mean, when we look at some of the research of our global strategists, I mean, in the short term, people often, populism, as ever, continues to pervade a lot of these contests. And in the short term, whilst sometimes we see a spike in inflation, there doesn't seem to be, say, a big effect from populism. But in the longer term, there is, evidence that there are higher debt to GDP ratios, less trade openness in an economy. So these elections that which will be happening globally this year are definitely going to be consequential. And obviously the US is the one perhaps that it is attracting and will attract more attention than most.
While this one's not scaring the lights out of investors, I think there are ramifications, and perhaps if I can tackle the sacred cow here, and that's the NHS. It feels as though the populism we're seeing is also part of the UK election to an extent, to the point where you need to have a population that is satisfied with services provided by the government, NHS being one of them. I think there's no shortage of complaints. The fact that there's long A&E waiting times, very poor ranking now compared to other Western economies in terms of the health service, and fairly poor ranking when it comes to treating long-term illnesses. If we think about the NHS and whether it should be a priority this time round, given the fragmentation of politics and the populism we're seeing, does NHS need to be a priority over, say, tax cuts at this stage?
Well, that's ultimately a political decision, but it will be subject to the fiscal rules that each of the parties has subjected themselves to. And I don't think you will get either party promising to splurge money that they can't illustrate will be funded in some way, shape or form, and that is going to either be from cutting other services to fund the NHS or increasing taxation. I mean, we've always had this tradition in the UK of trying to have US levels of taxation and Scandinavian-style public services, and that is quite hard to achieve. But look, from a business perspective, from an investor perspective, the corporates that they invest in, the NHS is obviously incredibly important because it ensures you've got a healthy workforce. But this is, going to be one of the big issues. But I always get, it's interesting because if you look at a lot of the debates, you mentioned this 28 billion pound capital commitment and to green spending that the Labour Party in the UK had made, which they've recently dropped. Finance is just part of the equation here. Unless you get the other things right, then you can't actually deliver. So, JPMorgan, we've done $176 billion worth of green financing over the last couple of years. We're the biggest green investment banking business globally. But then, unless you have the right public policy environment, you have consumers, consumer uptake of new green products and technologies. And at the moment, because of the cost of living crisis, people, are not spending what they were on EV cars, for example, unless people innovate and create the right technology. And above all, you sort out planning permits and grid connection issues, then you can put all the money into the engine, so to speak, but the car's not going to go anywhere. And so there are these broader issues that you really do need public policy makers to focus on.